So welcome everyone to Back to School District Learning Continuity and Attendance. We're glad folks are able to join us today. We know folks are busy. We know there's a lot going on with back to school. Before we get started, we do want to have everyone check in. So if you can go into your chats, we're going to ask folks to share your name, your pronoun, your organization, and your city or school. If you look at this picture of Angelica's head, that is an example. So put it in the chat again. Angelica will put down Angelica, she, her. She's from the organization Public Advocates. She's based in Oakland, California. That is her on the screen if you can see her waving. So everyone, please check in the chat. We want to see where folks are repping today, where folks are coming from. What's up, Jamila? Fresno, CFJ. 10 CFJ. Shout out to all the CFJ folks. Inland Empire. I'm seeing SoCal, ICUC, ICS. So many acronyms. Long Beach, Strong Beach, San Jose, San Bernardino. Central Valley, SF, Oakland, SF again. So again, put your name, pronoun, organization, city or school district in the chat, check in, say hi to people, tell a joke. No one's gonna tell a joke. And while folks are checking in, I do wanna introduce our team for today. So again, please continue to type in the chat. Well, my name is Karn Setang. I'm with Californians for Justice. I work as a Policy and Alliance Director. The team that is putting this on today, here are two fantastic pictures of Nicole and Angelica and a terrible picture of me. So Nicole and Angelica from Public Advocates, again, I'm with Californians for Justice. We are organizing this as a partnership, as the California Partnership for Future of Learning. The California Partnership for Future of Learning is a statewide alliance of community organizing and advocacy groups, advancing a shared vision of a transformational, racially just education system built for us all. It's led by Advancement Project California, Californians for Justice, PICO California, and Public Advocates with the support of Community Coalition, Inner City Struggle, and over a dozen grassroots research and philanthropic partners. So you can look us up online. I can share the link in the chat afterwards. So again, we are going to start with a grounding. I also forgot to mention really quickly, for folks who are using the interpretation feature, again, if you click participants, there's a thing that says go slower or go faster. If any of the speakers are going too fast or we're going too slow, you can click that, and we'll make sure to flag that.
Hey, Karn, I see that Heidi has clicked go slower.
I'm talking too fast, which means I will slow down my pace. Thank you, Heidi, for naming that. So we want to make sure that, again, because we're having interpretation, we want folks to make sure that our interpreters are able to follow everything that our speakers are saying. We're going to start with a grounding. This is a DeLorean. For folks who have seen Back to the Future, this was a time travel machine. We're going to put ourselves in this DeLorean. We're going to ask everyone to close your eyes. Even if we can't see you, pretend you just close your eyes. Even if your screen's not showing, close your eyes. We want folks to get in this DeLorean, travel back in time to basically any kind of middle school, high school era, back to your first day of school. We want you to think about what age you were, what grade did you land in, what are you wearing, what is in your backpack, how did you get to school? So take yourself back to, again, school. We want you to visualize in your brain what you're seeing. When did you get to the school building? When you're walking up those steps, what do you see? What do you hear? Who is greeting you? Do you see your friends, the principal, other staff? And the bell rings. It's time to head to your first class, meet your teacher. When you get to your classroom, what are you noticing? Is there stuff on the walls? Are there posters? How's the classroom set up? Did anyone say hi to you? How do you decide where to sit? Do you get to decide where to sit? And how are you feeling? So we're gonna take a couple of seconds, really let that sit with you for a bit. And now we want folks to pause. Take a moment to thank your younger self for sharing this kind of back to school memory, imagining with you. And we want folks to type in the chat again. What did it feel like to go back to school again as a young person? If you're still in school, what does it feel like to go back to school or have to go back to school in this moment? So again, put in the chat, whatever you're comfortable sharing. How did it feel to be back in school? Nerve-wracking. 6th grade scrunchies. First day jitters, nerve-wracking, exciting, stress, because Tin didn't do her summer reading again. Yeah, put down all the feels in the chat, y'all. And then as folks are continuing to put that in, you know, as we know, back to school for young people is gonna look very different this year. This has been a hell of a year. That trip to the school door for most of our young people right now looks like a click of a button. So in this very changed environment, we're here to talk about how we can be organizing to make sure back to school is meaningful and supportive for our students and families, which brings us to our goals and our agenda for today. So the learning goals for today, number one, we want to understand what the learning continuity plan is. Number two, we want to learn how to leverage the learning continuity plan within our organizing and our advocacy. And number three, we want to understand the related budget timeline and the process. And to do that, the agenda, we did the welcome, the housekeeping, the grounding. Angelica is going to take us through a gift-filled budget warm-up. We're going to talk through the learning continuity plan, have a pair or triad share, and then come back for a large group discussion. And then we'll close out with some next steps. And with that, I am going to throw it to Angelica. Angelica, are you good?
Thanks, Con. Can you keep doing the screen share, or will you not be able to launch polls?
I will not be able to launch.
I actually don't see the poll.
Everyone see my polls when I launch it though?
Let's see. Okay, then I can take over the screen share. Thanks, y'all. Wait for a second. Karn, you're the host. I don't actually see the polling option, so why don't I take over screen share? Yeah?
Yes.
Okay. Thanks all. You seeing all my tabs? I tried to clean it up for you. And you're seeing, don't look at how many slides there are. I promise, they're fun. Close your eyes. Okay, here we go. All right, let me get in present mode. Okay, so like Karn said, so now it's time to warm up. We're gonna go on a brain exercises. Now that I'm presenting, I cannot see people at all. So folks need to help me out. And also please, so first we're gonna warm up, you know, to get we're gonna burn off the calories from all that imaginary cream cheese that Tin was getting from the lunch lady. And we're gonna talk about the most fun stuff around budget. So the first question is true or false, and we're gonna actually launch a poll, so don't go into the chat or unmute yourself yet. Instead, true or false, this year, school districts to get less funding from LCFF, the main source of state education funds. So now the poll has been launched. This year, school districts expect to get less funding from LCFF, the main source of state education funds. So please submit your choice. You should have seen the box come up on your screen. And then you can go ahead and close the poll, Karen, whenever you think the people who are awake and paying attention have chosen their response. There we go. Okay. So we have 28% said true and 72% said false. This was a tricky one because we were hearing a lot about huge cuts to LCFF before the state budget was adopted, but actually this one is, dun, 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 it's false. There are no cuts to LCFF in the coming year. And so, yay, that's also because of a lot of advocacy that folks here did on the call. And a lot of us work around that state funding. It's steady funding. There's not going to be a small cost of living adjustment. And we always knew that that wasn't enough to operate our schools, and certainly not enough to operate our schools in a pandemic. But the budgets that we were hearing about in June, where districts were anticipating, I'm so distracted by it, where folks were anticipating a 10% cut, that's not what's happening. So that is good news on budget. So going next, true or false? School districts are not getting extra funds to address the impacts of COVID-19. So again, there's no extra funds coming to school districts, no special funds, extra funds to address the impacts of COVID-19. So Karen, you can go ahead and close that when you think we've got a critical mass. And there we go. It's about the same split. It's about 24%, 76%. So the answer here is false. There's actually quite a big amount of money, and maybe not enough for the needs that we have, but $8.8 billion about in funding that's coming to school districts and also charter schools and county offices to address the impacts of COVID-19 on education. And in particular, people might have heard about the Federal CARES Act and the money that districts have been are anticipating. And then some of you may have actually been involved to make sure that that money went out more equitably. So many of the districts that we represent are getting a larger share of that money than districts that serve fewer English learners, low-income students, and high-need students, precisely because some of you didn't take off Memorial Day and testified before the state Senate to say how important it was that this federal money would be distributed to the districts that were going to be facing the biggest impacts of COVID. So here's just a sampling, and I know that we have many other folks on the call that are not in Fresno or Sacramento or LA, but just to give you an idea of the totals that we're thinking about, you know, these are some of the bigger districts, but you know, Fresno, $130 million, Sac City, $56 million, LA Unified, which of course is the biggest of them all. I mean, it's nearly $1 billion. So it's a lot of money. The need is great. The money does date back all the way to March. So I've heard that some districts are also using it, the funding, to fill holes that were in their budget from last year. And the money has not necessarily arrived yet, but they are anticipating it. Let me just see. Okay, so we have a link here that we'll send out after. Public Advocates did put together a chart with some other districts in it. And if your district's not in there and you want to know those amounts, definitely let us know, because we can help you look it up and understand. So just to recap around the budget, you know, there were no cuts to LCFF for this coming year. There was 2 pots of big federal aid that was coming that makes up that $8.8 billion. One pot is really to address learning loss. And there are some restrictions around this, that districts are having to spend most of it by December 30. That deadline might get pushed out, but we're waiting to find that out. So you may hear districts saying, oh, we have to spend it by December 30, and it's like a lot of stress around that. But we are expecting that they may get more time. And then there was another $1.5 billion that was distributed out based on Title I, based on the low-income students that were being served in the district. So altogether, that's how we got to that $8.8 billion. So this, in all the districts probably that we represent, means millions of dollars for a COVID response. I should say that this is one-time money, which means that it's not as flexible, and it often has to be spent on things that can't buy, like ongoing salaries, because there's not a commitment. We don't know if it'll come again. And many of us perhaps are hoping that, we're all hoping that Congress will pass another federal aid package called the HEROES Act. If we hear about that passing, then that would be a much bigger pot. The HEROES Act, what's in there, is much bigger than any of these pots, and that's really what we need. Otherwise, or even with that, we have major concerns beyond this year, of course. We know how the economy is collapsing. We know that our state funding relies a lot on income tax, and that people's income is going down. So all districts are bracing themselves that after this year, there is going to be a big shortfall. So just to say, even though we are saying there is money right now to address needs, we still need things like schools and communities first, Prop 15. We have to think about long-term, how do we really invest in the schools we deserve? Was this the place, sorry, are we gonna keep going? Sorry, I forgot, I have a queue for questions. So we're just gonna go through one more quiz. This is, and I'll read through it, but if you can launch it. So again, so what can these funds be used for, especially that big pot of learning loss funds is what I'm especially focused on. These funds are to address learning loss, protective equipment, teacher preparation for distance learning, technology needs, and you can check all that you think apply, mental health and social emotional needs, engaging students, nutrition, the childcare needs of parents and staff, stipends to families to co-educate their kids. So in the law, you know, just check what you think these funds are intended to address. Card? I know that was a lot for people to read. I told you it was a great exercise. All right. So the winner there, teacher preparation for distance learning. That was a very obvious one. Some of the others, the technology we're hearing a lot about, learning loss, at least as it pertains to the academic standards that we're expecting kids to be prepared on, mental health and social emotional needs. But we also see every one of these that there is, has been checked. And then what I can say on this next one, you can see that these particular ones, all the ones down to nutrition, are actually named in the law as things that the learning loss funds and the learning continuity plans should be addressing. The reason, now that isn't to say necessarily that there couldn't be a discussion about using this pandemic funding for childcare needs of parents and staff, or stipends to families to co-educate their kids. I really want to give shout out to Bay Area Plan and Coleman Advocates and the parents in West Contra Costa that I attended a session with them this last Saturday, and these ideas were coming up. And I'm not sure. I don't know. It's not named in the law, but we also locally are hearing there are needs around childcare. There are needs to recognize the work that families are going to be doing this year that is above and beyond. At the same time, the things above the list that are checked are actually specifically named in the statute around things that the learning loss and learning loss funds and learning continuity plan should address. Okay, and now here is where we are going to stop for questions, Karin. So Karin, Nicole, our chat moderators, Maura, Norva, if you could help me out. Do we have questions?
Yeah, if folks have questions, put it in the chat. I see some questions coming up in Spanish that I can't translate. But Heidi, do you see these questions?
Yeah. So maybe if Heidi can come to the English channel.
Or if we need more time to process these questions, Heidi, because I can't hear you, Heidi. Oh, wait.
Oh, Heidi translated in the chat. Is that what happened? Okay. I can't see the chat, so Karn, if you could ask me the question.
Why is the language used different from the States one? Dan, I don't think I understand that question. Money is needed for the parents and child care.
Who is the question from?
And would you be able to re-ask your question?
Who is it?
Diana.
¿Puedo aclarar
Okay.
mi pregunta?
I think we need to ask what language.
Mi nombre es Diana Guillén.
Okay, let's do it that way.
Sí. Donde dice la parte de involucración de estudiantes, yo bajé la planilla del Estado y ahí dice familias y estudiantes, no solamente involucración de estudiantes. Y ese mismo lenguaje o esa misma palabra que están quitando de familias, lo están haciendo en el distrito escolar. Para nosotros los padres es importante que se use como el Estado lo está diciendo, porque cuando ustedes quitan la palabra familia, se están quitando a los padres. Por eso estoy preguntando, ¿por qué omiten la palabra familias en el involucramiento? Porque yo bajé la planilla que viene directamente de Sacramento, y ahí dice que familias también. Por eso estoy preguntando, ¿por qué están omitiendo la palabra familias?
Okay, yes. So in terms of the student, so there's two pieces. So family engagement is definitely embedded both in the importance of the distance learning. I think if I understand the question now, and it's embedded in the distance learning, but perhaps you're asking because I specifically named the student engagement piece. So, and I will talk a little more about how family engagement is a part of it. But when I move forward in the learning continuity plan, there is a prompt that's specifically around pupil engagement and outreach. And that's the title of the prompt, but it does speak specifically to student, to engaging the student and engaging their families, and that is really important. And I think the feedback that I'm hearing though is that even if, so, and I'm not sure exactly what language you're referencing from the state, but that it's important to name the family engagement piece here as well, like when I lift up student engagement and family engagement. And I think, it's a good question for me why I didn't. I think the way that I was reading the statute was that unfortunately I wasn't seeing it put as much emphasis on the family piece. And a little bit later you'll see I was lifting up though that the family piece is completely linked to the success of the student engagement, and the family piece is completely linked to the distance learning. But I'm happy to connect also afterwards about the particular part that you're talking about from the law. So, and that's great that you already downloaded the template. Thank you.
Sí, solamente quiero aclarar que cuando ustedes presentan esto, tienen que poner esa palabra que es importante, porque si no, los padres van a decir, nosotros no estamos ahí. Y el Estado sí lo está exponiendo. Y yo las presentaciones que he visto, incluyendo la del superintendente de LUSD, no lo trae así como ustedes. Pero la planilla del Estado sí trae estudiantes y familias, involucramiento de familias y estudiantes, en esa misma frase.
Okay, thank you.
I see Isa from CFJ had a question that Nicole might have also answered. Is the money going to nutrition going to be for take-home food for students? What do they mean by nutrition exactly? And what will be done differently than before? And then I also see that Nicole had put down a description of how the districts are going to provide nutritionally adequate meals for all pupils, including those students who are eligible for free or reduced price meals. And pupils are participating in both in-person instruction and distance learning as applicable. Since most schools are closed, I believe it will cover take-home food. But I don't know if y'all have any more insight on the nutrition piece as well.
I think that probably covers it. It's about to continue. So it will be, they may have changed their plan since last year, but it's still what is their plan to provide meals to students. And while students are continue to be in distance learning, it will continue to be probably a take-home meal plan. Any other questions? Should we keep moving?
Let's keep moving, and then we can collect these questions into other space too.
Okay. I see Sol and Heidi. You're good? Okay. All right. Thanks. Okay. So now we're going to move into just a question for you all in terms of what should your school district buy with pandemic funds. And for this part, we're going to ask folks if you can either if you have a second device, like to grab a phone, or you might be able to open, a new tab in your window. So you might need to exit out if you have your screen maximized. But we want you to go to the website, and we can put it in the chat as well, menti.com. Let me exit out of this maximize thing so you all can see what it looks like. You're going to go to menti.com, and then you're going to enter this code 466177. Okay. So you're going to go to menti.com and enter the code 466177. And then when you do that, you're going to see the question, what should your school district buy with pandemic funds? And then you can put something in like, this is right on my mind right now, like family engagement liaisons, and then submit. So whatever and you can submit as many times as you would like. So I'm going to stop my share there. So again, if folks can go to menti.com. And also, if people are having trouble with that, you can enter your response in the chat, and we can add them in. We can add them in ourselves.
And folks are Spanish.
Mara, can you say that again?
I was saying, should folks ask it in Spanish, or should they put it in the chat and we do it in English? Or is it?
Spanish is fine. People can enter their response in Spanish or English. And you can do it on the Menti, but if it comes in over here, we just, like Anna's, I will enter Anna's in for her. Oh, there's a character limit. So if you want to maybe start sharing your screen, wow. Okay, if you can start sharing your screen. Oh, here, we're seeing it now. So this is Karn's screen, and this is what folks are starting to enter in. And I'm going to just say out loud some of the words so we make sure the translation is happening, but very big in the middle is mental health supports. I'm seeing mental health counselors. Let's see what else. Karn, what are you noticing?
I'm seeing Wi-Fi for students, family internet access, family engagement liaison, anti-racist training, tech, academic counseling. I'm seeing a lot of like access to internet, a lot access to technology, childcare, a lot of internet access.
I see a lot of technology for students, family engagement. People are still answering. And so the size of the wording kind of indicates if there were more responses, like the sort of the popularity of the response. But also if we really studied it, people might have phrased it a little bit differently, but there may be a lot of ideas there that are similar.
Yeah.
Okay.
Parent stipends, I think someone brought that up in the chat too. Parents should be compensated because they're basically doing the work of what a lot of schools are doing, so compensating parents.
And I see, Anna, I see a couple other responses being entered in the chat that we can enter in later, but things around technology, translation, interpretation systems, and computers instead of Chromebooks. Education for parents on Zoom. Stipends for parents.
Oh yeah.
Money for parents. I'm hearing that. Okay, I think we might have to close this. Students with disabilities popped up, a childcare. But I think, you know, if people keep entering, we can share this out at the end in terms of what the final one looks like. It's also getting smaller and smaller as more words are coming in. So I'm going to share screen again, and we're going to jump into the learning continuity plan content. Here we go. We're going to just take a quick peek just to know where we are kind of in this timeline around the budget. The state is likely going to revise its budget this month, and many of us in the school districts that we're in are also going to be revising their budgets probably in August or in September. And I have the Spanish on the next slide so we can toggle back and forth. But just knowing we're about to talk about the learning continuity plan, and the piece that I really wanted to emphasize is that on September 30 is when that plan has to be adopted by. So, and we'll talk about the engagement, but there needs to be public hearing before the adoption, and there needs to be engagement with the parent committees. So imagine much of that needs to happen, you know, in August. In the meantime, we know folks are going back to school. In Oakland, my child starts school on Monday. So schools will be opening, and the plans are already starting to be implemented. So that means now is the time to be involved around, you know, how is this money going to be spent? What are the plans to meet our needs? So let's talk about the learning continuity plan. What is it? So it is a tool really for the districts to be able to explain how they will provide quality learning opportunities, regardless of whether school's open and it is happening in person or it's happening at a distance. And how they're going to support the needs of students and staff, and I should say, and families during the 2020-21 school year. Many of us on this call are usually very involved in the LCAP plan. There is no LCAP this year. The next LCAP won't be until next June, until June of 2021. And, but there is this learning continuity plan. It is the main way for districts to explain what they're doing to support students and families. As I mentioned, school boards are going to have to adopt that learning continuity plan by September 30 at the latest. So you should be expecting, most will probably be doing their public hearings in early September and be doing engagements with their parent committees sometime in August, or surveys or other things around their plans during this month. So why do we need this plan? I feel like it's obvious to the folks on this call, but we really need to make sure that kids are going to keep learning, kids and young people are going to keep learning and having a quality learning opportunities. And also that districts are supporting families and students to address the impact of COVID-19. In particular, this also has a focus on the needs of students who've been most impacted by COVID, or who are especially vulnerable during this time, like students experiencing homelessness, English language learners, foster youth students, low-income students. So many of the student groups we already look at it, in LCAP. We also want to make sure that federal and state funding that's coming to address the impacts of COVID are being spent effectively. And so this plan not only is about writing out what the plan is, but also about the actions and spending. So similarly to an LCAP, the district has to report what it's doing in these different areas of mental health, distance learning, engaging with students and families. And this is my daughter in front of her school with her mask on. Let's see. Okay, so now we're warmed up. So the learning continuity plan must explain, and we're going to launch another poll. So the learning continuity plan must explain in-person and distance learning. Again, you can check as many as you want. Addressing learning loss, mental health and social emotional well-being, student engagement. And I have in my head, I'm like, and family engagement. So keep that in mind. Student engagement, nutrition, actions and spending, stakeholder engagement to develop that plan. You know, so how did they engage with stakeholders around the plan? And last, all of the above.
Literally.
So Karn, are we close the poll? All right. Yeah, so everybody, there was all across the board, and then people got to the end and we're like, oh, all of the above. Guess what? Yes, you got it. It's all of the above. All those things are parts of this learning continuity plan. Many of the things that we care about should be reflected here in this plan. Of course, it's not just about getting into the document. It's about getting it into our lives and making it real. But it is, it is a plan that's supposed to really talk about addressing the needs of students, staff, families at this time. So as I said, in-person instruction and distance learning, that's like a big need of the plan, is how is the district going to continue learning, whether it happens in person or it happens at a distance. And that means that the plans can be quite confusing because there's different models for how to have safe learning in person, how to have quality learning at a distance. There's a specific discussion around how are they going to assess learning loss, and from the closures in March, as well as moving forward, and how they're going to address that. And there are specific call outs for students with unique challenges. So in your district, thinking about who are the students and families who are most impacted, and not necessarily just who we would talk about in LCAP, but for example, we've heard that Black and Latinx communities are being hit harder by COVID. And so what kind of impact might that mean on people's ability to engage in distance learning? Or the essential worker population, how many of your families might be essential workers or unable to be home and supporting distance learning. So all those things could be, a part of what you want to make sure your district is really addressing. And when you say district, we want to make sure that comes to your school, right? And how that makes a difference in the schools that you are supporting. Around this student engagement piece, like thinking back on, what the discussion we had earlier, really that piece is about thinking about how are they, what's their plan to keep students engaged, and especially for those students who are not participating, how will they keep them engaged, and how will they engage, let their families know too if they are not keeping up with educational expectations. And this, I think the fact that mental health and social emotional well-being is in here and called out in the plan is actually a victory for the advocacy that groups like ours have been doing, because that's not something that's specifically called out in the LCAP. But here there is a specific prompt around mental health, and we'll talk more about that. And then we talked a little bit about nutrition as well. I just wanted to take a closer look at distance learning. I'm not going to dive deep into this, but we have the slides. At the end of this presentation, we have slides that kind of give the specific language around each of these areas in terms of what they need to address, but it's just like so much information to take in. I want to give a hat tip to Piccoli at Plan, who pointed me to this infographic from Cal Matters that talks specifically about distance learning and some of those requirements. So some of the things that are in the state law are that there is a requirement around daily live interaction with teachers and with classmates that needs to happen, which was not part of the spring plan. And that's one of the areas that's being kind of hotly debated as teachers unions and school districts are coming to agreements. There's going to be a need to take student attendance and prevent disengagement. So that was that piece that I was talking about, that the schools must have a plan for how they're going to re-engage students who are absent from distance learning more than 3 school days. And when we say re-engage students, that also means engaging with the family, right? And engaging with family in the languages that they speak, if those are not English. It also means meeting the connectivity. We had a lot of folks talking about the technology piece, like helping to support folks having the technology necessary to have distance learning. There's no set minimum minutes for the live instruction, and so that also has been a kind of a point of, I think, tension in the conversations with unions and school districts around, you know, what does that mean in terms of how much we're expecting each teacher to provide live instruction. And you might hear the word synchronous instruction that's happening live and in real time versus asynchronous instruction that might happen recorded, not in real time, not interactive in real time. So I think we're going to stop here, but I wanted to kind of lay those out because those are some of the things, big things that we're going to see that the agreements with the teachers unions are going to hit on. Do we have questions, Karan?
We have some comments that I want to lift up, and if Anna or Diana, you also want to share. I see one from Anna that says, let's see.
So Maura said that Anna was talking about there needs to be a place in this plan for parents, and I don't see it. Yeah, so I think somewhat to our back and forth earlier too, is that there is not a specific prompt. Well, so what I'm not talking about right now is that the plan does have a stakeholder engagement section, which particularly this plan has to go by the parent committees, both the English learner and the kind of the LCAP parent advisory committee. So there is a specific place to talk about the engagement that you did with parents around this plan, but there is not a specific prompt in the plan that says, how are you engaging families? The prompt is more pupil engagement and outreach, and then how are you engaging with students, including how are you going to re-engage students who have not been engaged for 3 days, and that means also reaching out to their families. So I think Anna is pointing to a big gap in the plan. And so knowing that there is not that prompt in the plan, what are the ways that we can make sure that in your district they're talking about family engagement? And I do think that in all those areas that we saw, for example, distance learning, you can't have effective distance learning. Sorry, ooh, everyone's looking at my email. Embarrassing. You can't have effective distance learning without when the classroom are people's homes, you cannot have effective distance learning if you are not engaging with families. And so I think that's what we do need to lift up, but it is a gap in what's required of the plan. Was there anything, Nicole, you wanted to add on that? No, okay. Okay. Anything else from the chat?
Yeah, just some more comments. There are some questions as well. Amador Arts, many rural communities lack internet and cellular infrastructure. Diana was saying earlier, LAUSD is not ready or prepared to start classes in 2 weeks. Laura from ICS is asking, was there minimum set from the state on teacher planning time, total amount of minutes?
No. So the minutes piece from the state was specifically around instructional minutes. So if you look at this blue part here, it's set at about 3 hours per day for kindergarteners, and then closer to 4 hours for the older grades. But instructional minutes is a combination of kind of live time with the teacher and also not live time, that asynchronous time. So it could be, watching videos, and also what's called the time value of work assigned. So it could also be, it's all together, that instruction time includes the time you're doing your schoolwork as well. Other than that, there's no set requirements. So this gray part up here, there's no set requirements around how many minutes to spend for live instruction, or how many hours, teachers have to be, for example, on duty. So I think in LA, they just set their on-duty time as 6 hours a day. And then I know in West Contra Costa, for example, at West Contra Costa, it's about a 6 hour day, and it's almost, I think, 2 hours of preparation time for teachers each morning. And that's something that they negotiated with the union. So I think the reason I keep mentioning the teachers union is because many of these things are being negotiated at the bargaining table. And so if you have particular questions or opinions about, what would be best for students, it's important to open up those lines of communications to your unions in addition to your districts. Because the MOUs are going to have, the agreements are going to have a big impact, I think, on what this learning plan looks like.
Yeah, and then, just for the sake of time, I think we can also, again, follow up with questions that we aren't able, or try to follow up with questions we aren't able to answer right now. Just really quickly, thank you, Norma, for translating that. Diana was lifting up nutrition is not good. It needs to change.
So beautiful.
Companies that provide unhealthy food.
Thanks.
I think we can come back to these later too.
All right. Okay, stay awake. Wake up. Wake up. Can you launch this next poll? It's I think that it may be slightly worded. I think I had to change the wording because it wouldn't fit in the character count. So the district must reach out to a student who's not engaged in learning, including their families in other languages. It's worded slightly different on the slide, but true or false. If a student is not engaging in learning or is not meeting education requirements, the district must reach out to the student and to their families, including in languages other than English. Oh, they both woke up. All right, how we doing, Karin? I know that's a mouthful. Yes, so 91% true, 9% said false. So on this one, it's true though. That's what Janet is saying. That is true. Districts must have a plan to reach out and engage students who are not participating in learning, or are at risk of learning loss, or are not meeting their educational requirements. So if a student is falling behind in any way, then the district, and that by extension the school, must have a plan to reach that student and reach out to the family. And this includes reaching out to students' families in languages other than English. And I mentioned in particular, the trigger that's in the law is if a student is absent for 3 days, 3 school days, then there has to be some kind of plan for how to re-engage. So this also feels like a place where folks may want to get involved to ask about what is that plan, or make the suggestions about what are the best ways to reach families. Like when I hear that feedback around in the rural parts of the state, families have connectivity, I could really see that this could really be triggered there, how hard it would be to access distance learning if you don't have reliable internet or devices. And so what is the plan going to be, knowing that that's the situation in the districts that you're working in? So I'm going to pass this off now to my colleague, Nicole Ochi, who's in LA, and she's going to talk a little bit more about the mental health and social emotional pieces.
Good afternoon, everyone. I know we've been sitting here for about an hour, so maybe we can take a quick stretch break. But I'm like the worst person to lead stretch breaks. I always defer to others. So I don't know, let's just go like this, or do whatever you want to do that makes you feel a little bit more energized. I'm sorry we can't take a real break. Maybe just do a few shoulder rolls forward and then backwards. I see someone rolling their neck. That sounds like a good idea. So let's try that. All right. All right. Thank you, everyone. I guess if you could share the screen again, Angelica.
Sure.
Thank you. So I'm going to be talking a little bit more in detail about the mental health and social emotional well-being parts of the Learning Continuity Plan. And first, I just want to give a big shout out to all of you on this call, because I think it was your collective effort, the organizations, the parent leaders, the student leaders, who really pushed the state to recognize and invest in mental health and social emotional well-being. This plan is a special opportunity, I think, because it does call these things out specifically and requires districts to really sort of describe how they're going to meet the demands of this moment in this area. And I think it also kind of imposes, in some ways, a duty on them to really take care of the social emotional well-being of their school communities. So, so that's exciting. So here, what you see here on the slide, these are basically the 3 areas that the Learning Continuity Plan focuses on. How will the district monitor and support the mental health and social emotional well-being of students and staff? What professional development will the district provide to staff? And what resources will the district provide to address trauma and other impacts of COVID-19? Additionally, for mental health and for most other things in the Learning Continuity Plan, there have to be specific actions, specific sort of programs and services that are outlined to address mental health and social emotional well-being, and how much is being spent on those things. So next slide, please. And so I'm going to throw these in the chat, but one thing that we did, and by we I mean the Partnership for the Future of Learning, we created a resource to try to help folks advocate for mental health in these plans. Because we can treat these learning continuity plans like any other compliance document, or we can really leverage it for something more. And so that's the goal of this document. It's to help with that. Hopefully you can see the chat in there. The slides are really small, but if you want to click on the links and follow along, then that would be great. So the first question in here is really around how is the district identifying and supporting high need and hard to reach students and families. So as I mentioned before, the Learning Continuity Plan sort of requirements really suggest that the districts have a duty to support the mental health and social emotional well-being of school communities. But the threshold question is really identifying and connecting with everyone in that community, right? Because it's impossible to do what they ask, which is to monitor and support the mental health and well-being of students if you're not in touch with each and every student. So, so luckily the Learning Continuity Plan does require districts to describe their engagement and outreach plans, but we suggest or kind of give some ideas of additional questions you can ask to really push. So like things like, are you identifying the needs and challenges of students that have not consistently participated in distance learning? Are you building trust over time with students and families to engage them in the school? And thinking of more creative ideas, like maybe working through trusted CBOs can be more effective than working through staff in some cases. How are you sustaining engagement? Things like that. Next slide, please. So the next sort of set of questions here is around the actual plan. And again, the Learning Continuity Plan says that you have to monitor and support the mental health and well-being of pupils and staff. But what does this really look like? And so these questions are designed to sort of push in that area. So they're talking about professional development, for example. How are you going to give professional development to staff to address the trauma of COVID? But as we all know on this call, COVID isn't the only trauma that students are experiencing. And so it's also crucial for teachers to receive professional development on implicit bias and anti-racist pedagogy, because kids have been traumatized by our racist systems for a really long time before COVID hit. So it's not maybe required, but it's an opportunity to push, again, to push them to disclose things, to talk about things they might not otherwise talk about. I don't think I have time to go through all of these things, but I do want to highlight this one here on the bottom. I think it's probably pretty easy for many districts when they kind of think about their plan. Oh, I'm sorry. To think about their plan, they're thinking about, how are they deploying their teachers and their staff to support students and families' social emotional well-being during this time. But one of the things that I think all of you have shared and that we've heard through various needs assessments projects that we've been a part of is that peer-to-peer support and interaction, being in peer-led spaces, is really one of the #1 things that students and families are sort of demanding that they need, that they feel would really help their social emotional health. And so really, thinking about pushing districts to invest resources in those things as well. So next slide, please. So then this next bucket of questions is around that requirement that districts talk about what they're doing and how much they're spending on mental health and social emotional well-being. So, as we discussed earlier in this presentation, districts have regular funding sources like LCFF that hasn't been cut, and it is receiving extra money to address the pandemic, which provides an opportunity to invest in programs, services, and people that promote the mental health and social emotional well-being of school communities. So you can see some ideas here. One idea that's not in here that's really sort of interesting is leveraging Medi-Cal as a sustainable funding stream to increase mental health services for students. We're definitely not the experts on this, but if you're interested in that, I think we can connect you to some folks who are. The pandemic funds are one-time funds, and I think that it's interesting to kind of think about what new things can those funds be used to start. Many of us were on a webinar yesterday about a restorative return to school, and they talked about parent-teacher home visits. So this could be a really awesome use of some of these extra pandemic funds, training, compensation for time, extra duty time for teachers to engage in parent-teacher home visits, for example. Other examples are, maybe increased intensive professional development on social emotional learning, anti-racist training, that kind of thing, expanding contracts to do restorative justice and transformative justice beyond sort of the limited scope that's happening currently. So those are some ideas, and if you have other ideas, it would be great for you to chat those. And lastly, the last thing that this tool kind of provides is like sort of the bigger picture around, I guess, data analysis for long-term planning. So the learning continuity plan doesn't require this data collection, but it does require a needs assessment of high need students and sort of districts to analyze how effective a program or service is in contributing to the district's equity obligation, same as the LCAP. So this is also a good opportunity to think about things like, you know, how can we improve our school climate surveys? Can we start doing more regular work around focus groups of high need families and students to really have their perspectives be at the forefront of policy making, things like that. So anyways, that is the end of this section. Happy to answer any questions if anyone has any. And also happy to hear what you think about this and if you have any ideas to leverage this portion of the learning continuity plan.
Yeah, I think, Isa, you just want to ask your question and unmute yourself so we can hear your voice.
Sure, yeah. So I just have a question. I'm wondering, is there any hiring criteria for those social, emotional, and mental health support? Or is that at the discretion of like the district or the school sites? I'm worried about schools giving emergency credentials to teachers or staff who have no experience in helping folks with their mental health.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I don't believe there's any sort of guidelines from the state. I think that is up to the districts, but I know a lot of folks here have expertise on this area of work. I've been working in it for a long time. I don't know if there are other sources of requirements sort of that we could look to. If anyone else, Angelica or Karn or anyone else on this call has any other helpful information on the sort of hiring criteria issue.
Right now, there's nothing that prescriptive. You know, it's just sort of this broad, you have to have a plan for how to address mental health and social emotional needs. But I also that the requirements around credentialed teachers, you know, and these other positions, counseling positions, those still, I believe still apply or aren't waived. Can we make sure everyone's muted? And then, so in terms of, I think it'd be good in the districts that you're working to kind of ask, are they looking to hire new positions or are they creating new positions? Now there might be non-credentialed type of positions or peer support. They might be, you know, that the districts may be considering. We're not even sure right now, actually, what folks are planning.
You know, I also want to lift up something I see here in the chat, and I also recognize that Sandra has her hand up, that Diana said that within these plans, there should be investment in diverse programs. It's a mistake to think that counselors and psychologists are the only option that works for everyone. I think that's a really helpful comment and something I know that I've been talking about with some other folks in different areas around community workers and how community workers can also be really helpful and more accessible. If folks have other ideas for what sorts of, you know, people, I guess, help support the social emotional well-being of your communities, please continue talking about that. But anyway, Sandra, do you want to ask your question?
Sí, buenas tardes. Mi pregunta es, ¿cómo se les va a estar monitoreando a los niños el avance o si académico o si es que se están estancando? ¿Cuál sería el plan para darle seguimiento a esos niños que igual pues necesitan avanzar en su ámbito académico, verdad?
I'm so sorry, can you repeat that really quick?
Sí, claro. Mi pregunta es, ¿cómo se les va a ayudar o se les va a brindar apoyo a los estudiantes ya una vez que se identifique si es que se están quedando atrás hablando académicamente, si es que no están avanzando académicamente?
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Angelica. Go ahead.
I think that is exactly the type of question that you should be posing to your school principal, your school district leadership and also your teachers unions, because that's some of what is being discussed, is how are they going to keep track of whether students, how are they going to be assessing how students are doing academically. So we know one piece of this is they're going to have to take some kind of attendance and track student participation. But they're also going to have to come up with some way to find out at the beginning of the year, as school is starting, where is your student now? Where are the students now? That school is closed for 3 years, and we've been off 3 years, 3 months. In the summer, it feels like 3 years, y'all. And then along the way, having ways to check on the progress. But I think that is exactly the type of thing that needs to be explained in this plan, in terms of how are you going to keep track of who, where students are academically. And then another thing is that with these funds and with this plan, how are you going to target and really support interventions for those students who maybe have fallen furthest behind or who might need the most support? That is also something that should be a focus of this plan, of their actions.
I think we'll take one more question. I think Ana Carrion had a question. Do you want to ask your question, Ana?
Does Ana need to unmute?
Sí, sí, ya. ¿Ya me escuchan?
Yes.
Ok, mi pregunta es, ¿cómo poder entonces saber cuál es el plan de instrucción del UTLA en el distrito de Los Ángeles para poder nosotros mirar qué es lo que ellos están planeando y qué es lo que necesitan los padres, ya que los padres están supliendo todas las áreas dentro del área de la escuela, en el área escolar, y cómo vamos a hacer nosotros parte de conexión los que estamos haciendo o vamos a continuar virtualmente en nuestras casas, ya que tenemos, me puedo incluir estudiantes de educación especial con diferentes discapacidades de integración. Entonces, ¿cómo se va a ayudar de instrucción en capacitación a los padres con estas desventajas para los estudiantes?
Next up, is there a description of some of the supports
I'm gonna, because I think Ana is actually jumping right into, we're not gonna have time for our breakouts. This is us on the Zoom call. I'm trying to move forward. But we had these questions for folks, which is, I think, very similar to the question that Ana was posing around, you know, how can parents plan is and how can we impact it, right? I think she was asking about, like, how do we even know what the instructional plan is, and make sure that, you know, students and know what they're going to be doing so that parents can plan what we need to do, because parents have to support kind of every aspect of it. And I think that connects to what we wanted to talk about with the little time that we had around how could we use this learning continuity plan to help be organized and prepared, and what support and resources do people need. But to Anna's specific question, I think everybody who has kids in school or preparing to go to school is wondering, what is the plan? And what is the plan to support the unique needs of my kids or the kids at my school? And right now, they're just starting to trickle out, like the agreements between the teachers' unions and the districts, like in LA. So there may be pieces of it in there, but we're going to have to, I think, help each other to understand, you know, what those plans are. And really the school community should be communicating it out. But I know as of my child starts school on Monday, I still don't know what it's going to look like on Monday and what it's supposed to be other than it's distance learning. So I kind of, you know, if you can repeat one more time Heidi's question, want to put it back out to the group and see if people have in the chat ideas for that. Heidi, would you be able to repeat Anna's question one more time? Oh, okay. Or didn't? It was like, how can we see the instructional plan in our district to be able to see what they're planning? But then I didn't get that second part around students with special needs. Mhm.
¿Quiere que le explique? Mi pregunta se basa en, my question is, because all parents or mothers, they are working inside in the home in support for all the students and different needs, and regular students and their needs, because we have the side of bilingual programs, English learners, and they have the LAUZ send the Chromebooks. The Chromebooks don't have the one system, the globe, the traduction, the translate. And then the student needs translate for classes. And the classes the teachers are only in English and don't have Spanish English. And what is the concern about the help, the support students bilingual for sending some materials, for sending homeworks, and then grew up their grades?
So I heard a few things there from Anna. So one thing to know is the Zoom interpretation feature we're using in this meeting doesn't work for Chromebooks, which is the technology, which is the hardware of choice in a lot of.
Is a fierce walk between communication.
Yes, and so that's
between the students and teachers, between parents and the teachers.
Yeah.
And we need change the laws in the system that translate inside in the schools, in the Chromebooks virtual.
Okay.
The technology.
Thanks, Anna. I think we have that one. Thank you for sharing with us, and also speaking in English too. So your English was easy.
I'm so sorry, my English is very bad.
No, perfecto. So, and I think I saw you lift this up. So I think really lifting up, and we have a lot of organizers on this call, that the translation systems are very important. I think we talk about it mostly for the parents, but also for many of the students. And, you know, and I think that connects to a bigger need around the communication and the communication of the plan. So even for those who are English speakers, like I was talking about, I don't know what the plan is for my child's school.
Yeah,
so
that's
the
right.
role that I think we are all playing in the districts that we're in is trying to make sure that that communication is coming through and holding our school district leadership and our school leadership accountable for communicating out to students and families in ways that they can understand. And for those who are working, I know we have a number of people here from LA, but I think it's also an issue in other districts. This particular issue around having access to the proper translation equipment is probably something that's going to need to be brought into your, maybe into your parent advisory committee and into your DLAC or English Learner Parent Advisory Committee, because those groups specifically have an opportunity to review and comment on the plan. And I know that Anna is a leader in those committees. So I would recommend that you actually provide recommendations specifically around those issues, because the superintendent will have to respond. We are at 10 minutes. What are we at? We are at less than 10 minutes to go. So I want to just pause to my team. I know there were other questions, but ask Karin and Nicole how y'all want to proceed, knowing that we were able to take a little bit more time with questions, but it didn't mean we didn't get to do the pair share.
Yeah, so I know we weren't able to answer everyone's questions. Continue to put the questions in the chat. We can commit to following up with folks after the webinar just for the sake of time, but maybe we can do the large group discussion with this. So again, we know there's a lot, obviously, of folks with experience, wisdom, and knowledge on this call. We just wanted to open it up and just pose this question to you all. Like, how could you use this learning continuity plan to help your organizing? That's the first question. And the second question, which I think some folks have already been lifting up, what support or resources do you need to really use this learning continuity plan? So again, the first question, how could you use the learning continuity plan to help your organizing? Second question, what support or resources do you need? Would love to hear people's thoughts on this call audibly.
People can use the raise hand feature if you go to the participants window, or actually sometimes if you click, no, I don't. Yeah, if you go to the participants window, you could raise your, you could just type into the chat. We can call on people. Nicole, you had a response to Diana.
I think this was something from earlier in the chat, so I was just putting this in here, but I'll just say it really quick so it can be maybe interpreted. I think maybe Diana's earlier concern was about how the use of the term family by the state, is that like intended to exclude parents, or is that undermining sort of parent rights and power? And my response was just that I don't think that's the intent. I think the intent is to recognize that primary caregivers are not always parents. They could be grandparents, foster parents, that sort of thing. So it's just an effort to be more inclusive. So anytime you see families, that's an effort to include parents plus any other sort of primary caregivers. If anyone else has anything to add to that, please feel free.
Thanks, Nicole. So how are, it's crickets out here, how are I know this is a lot to digest, hearing about the funds that are coming, that there could be budget meetings in your district, that unions and that a lot is getting decided among the unions in your school districts. And at the same time, I think the piece that I didn't go over was that there is engagement that's required around this learning continuity plan. It has to be brought to your parent advisory committee, or in Oakland where we have a parent student advisory committee. And it has to go to your DLAC or English learner committee. Are there ways you can use this to organize, or use knowing what they have to respond to? Does it connect to your own campaigns in any way?
I think for us, it does, specifically around equity and issues of like an equity framework within the resources that are being allocated or planned to be allocated. And so how do we kind of inject equity, student equity needs index and LAUSD into the continuity plan? So yeah, it's super helpful for us, I think, to at least guide us in looking for the right things. Mm-hmm.
Was that Laura?
Yes, that was me.
I'm like, Student Equity Needs Index. It's someone from LA.
Yeah. Sorry to be LA centered, but yeah, I think on our end, that's how it would help.
Yeah, and for folks who don't know, in LA, there's been a long campaign for how to direct more resources to schools that are facing kind of the greatest challenges. And so this is another way, you know, with this learning continuity plan, as they're talking about the actions and spending, how do we make sure that it's getting directed, the resources are getting directed to the schools that maybe are having the greatest impacts of COVID, maybe have the greatest challenges when it comes to distance learning. And I do think that there is a piece here on the learning continuity plan to push around, what does that look like? What you wrote in the plan, how does that look in my school? Like you say that there's going to be access to mental health, and that you're going to provide this district-wide, actually pushing for that connection to how will students, how will families at my school have access to that? So
¿Puedo decir algo?
Sure,
a mí me gustaría, mi nombre es Diana Guillén y soy la presidenta del Comité de Padres de DILAC, del Distrito Escolar de Los Ángeles, y a mí me gustaría que se apoyara que a los padres se les pague el internet de casa, porque tuvieron muchos problemas, esos hotspots que dieron no funcionan, se terminan rápido, y si realmente este plan de aprendizaje a distancia va a durar, no va a durar un mes, probablemente si los niños regresan a las clases y pasa algo, van a volver a regresar a distancia. Entonces, los padres se les debe de pagar el internet de casa, porque los niños, muchos de ellos perdieron instrucción precisamente por eso, porque no tenían acceso al internet. Entonces, yo he hablado, ¿verdad? He dicho que los padres deben recibir por familia un mínimo de $40 para pagar el internet de casa, porque es un derecho de los estudiantes. como esos 800 millones que hay para esta pandemia, esa es una de las cosas, ¿no? Y también quiero preguntar si es legal que los maestros estén pidiendo privilegios, porque ahorita como van las negociaciones del distrito escolar con UTLA, vemos que ellos no quieren que se les evalúe. Entonces, para mí eso es, como padre, es un privilegio que ellos quieren, y entonces quiere decir que no van a dar resultados, que ya de antemano se está anticipando el fracaso de nuestros hijos. Entonces, pienso que ese es algo que ustedes como organizaciones también que pensar si van a apoyar a los estudiantes, porque aquí hay mucho dinero y que al final de cuentas los que salen perdiendo siempre son los estudiantes. Ha habido mucho dinero como esa demanda que ustedes hicieron y que no llega a los estudiantes y que están cambiando siempre nada más de manos, pero no vemos resultados. Entonces, eso es algo que realmente como padres nos preocupa.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Deanna. So I heard a few things in your comment, and then I think we'll have to stop the comments because I see we're at time, so I understand some folks may need to jump off. If folks can hang with us a few minutes, we just want to close and make sure folks know the next steps. But I heard, Deanna, first you talking about one of the things that is kind of a demand that from what the partnership, our Partnership for Future of Learning put out, is the need for there to be permanent and universal digital access, that families need to have reliable Wi-Fi, not just hotspots, but that is just a basic condition like electricity. Like, you know, it's a basic need now for learning. And so that is something that we are interested in doing longer term advocacy. And my own team heard me. I had a rant this morning that was like, why is it up to the school districts to pay for all this? They're all competing against each other to get these hotspots and computers. It's a statewide need and it's a basic need. And it's certainly unfair, those who have the more reliable versus not, and it will contribute to inequities. So I hear you. I think it's something we need to keep raising. And be connected about, and also probably elevate even higher than our school districts, make it a demand to the state and to these companies. On the other piece I heard was around accountability, just in terms of, you know, how do we make sure that what's in the plan actually is happening? What do we do, you know, if my student isn't being served by their teacher? And also talking about, you know, we hear about the money, but then it doesn't reach our school. And then I think that is an ongoing piece for us to be in touch about around the organizing. I know Nicole and I are lawyers, and folks like to call in the lawyers and feel like that's what's going to make it real and that's what's going to get the money there. But I think it also has to be a combination. It's really the organizing also that's happening on the ground to build power, and us talking about what are the most effective ways to create real accountability to students and families. So it's not a clear answer there. I think it's something we want to keep talking about. What are going to be the best ways for families and students to have power within the system? Some other things that we put out here was making sure that you are engaging with the district, knowing about any meetings that are coming up on this, also opening lines of communication to your teachers union, because many things are being decided in those agreements between the districts and the union, and then also engaging at your school community level, because lots of times these discussions happen up here at the district level, and then you don't really see a connection to what's happening at your school. You know, speaking up, which I know folks on this call don't have a problem with at their meetings. Oh, sorry, it just went too far ahead. Sending written recommendations. So as I was telling Anna, especially through your parent advisory committee and your English learner parent advisory committees, they are supposed to be sending written recommendations, and the superintendent has to respond to those recommendations. You should ask them to respond before they adopt the plan. And as Laura was talking about, as in LA, pushing for funds to go to hardest hit school communities, really pushing for equity. And I think one of the challenges right now is when we were talking about these positions, I think a lot of schools don't even know what funds they might have access to, you know, based on the needs assessments that they're doing in their school communities. So these are some of our ideas. Please put in the chat if you have other ideas. Just, you know, before we close, we lost the great John Lewis a few weeks ago, but he, even in death, had final words for us and published this essay in the New York Times after his death, where he says, democracy is not a state, it is an act, and each generation must do its part to help build what we called the beloved community, a nation and world society at peace with itself. Ordinary people with extraordinary vision can redeem the soul of America by getting in what I call good trouble, necessary trouble. Now, I consider all of you to be those people with extraordinary vision who I really enjoy getting in good trouble with. This is going to be a time, if there ever was a time, for us to really be cultivating beloved community among ourselves in our school communities, and to be getting into that trouble. It's going to be now, because this is just such unprecedented times, the challenges that we're in. So part of why we were calling this space was also to make sure that you know us and know our faces, so that we can be supportive resources. And then also all of you, I know we didn't get to have that space for people to connect with one another, but we really want to make sure that we all are connected, that we lean on each other and we learn from each other, because I know each and every one of you on this call is doing inspiring work. I heard about I got to hear a lot about Laura and all the outreach that they were doing to students and families yesterday. And so there's a lot that we can learn from each other. So, you know, if people are interested to have a space like this again, I could see, you know, 4 weeks from now or something, us coming together again and just kind of hearing about, okay, now school has started. What does this really look like, you know? And what are you hearing? So if that's something that might interest you, it would be great to hear in the chat if you'd maybe want to come together again. If there's something that you think we should focus on, we'd be happy to call this group together again. But that's all I have for you right now. There are additional resources in this deck. It's a very long slide deck. And so we have a lot of links to the tool that Nicole was talking about, links to the recommendations around the future of learning, which included that digital access, and some other guides and many of them are translated into Spanish. So we'll make sure to share that out. And we'll also share out a request for evaluation so we can get your feedback on how we can get better at this. But I really want to thank everybody. I'm going to stop my share, and if folks can come off of, turn on your cameras, come off mute, and just say thank you. I just want to say thank you to you all. Thanks so much for coming. I want to really recognize our amazing interpreters, Heidi and Sol, this whole time, who've been holding it down. I also want to recognize our bilingual chat monitors, Norma, Maura. Also Jess from our team has been supporting, Nicole and Karn, who have been my partners in planning this together, and everybody else who probably chimed in and supported. And I should say a lot of the ideas that are in here are not my own, but are also just from the Thought Partnership and the energy that I get from all of you. I see Tere, I see Kim, I see Taryn. We learn so much from each other. So thank you all for coming. And we will be sharing out the deck, and we will be sharing out the recording. So thanks everybody. And I think, and if you're not on this list or didn't get this invite directly, please let us know so we make sure that you're on the next invitation. You're fine. Okay, gracias, thank you so much.